The Galactic Council had long considered themselves the rulers of the stars, a united force of the galaxy's most powerful species. They made decisions that shaped the fate of countless worlds, from peaceful alliances to brutal conquests. The Council held immense power, and no one questioned their authority until humanity arrived. Earth was a young, vibrant planet, full of promise and potential. But as humanity expanded into the stars, the Council saw them as a threat. Humans were unpredictable, their history marked by wars and survival against all odds. Despite their potential, the Council believed that humanity would disrupt the delicate balance they had worked so hard to establish. Behind closed doors, the Council made their decision. Humanity was dangerous, too unpredictable, and needed to be removed from the galactic stage. They couldn't let Earth's growing influence continue. In secret, they passed a resolution to strip humanity of its rights to intergalactic trade and travel. Earth would be cut off, isolated, and forgotten. The Council had no idea that this would be the mistake they would regret for centuries to come. On Earth, the leaders had no clue about the Council's decision. Life continued as usual. Humanity expanded its colonies, traded with nearby systems, and explored the far reaches of the galaxy. But whispers began to circulate among the higher-ups in the government. A few scattered reports spoke of strange decisions coming from the Council, decisions that left Earth's future uncertain. Then the first official message arrived, and it was a blow that no one had seen coming. The message was clear. Humanity was no longer welcome in the galactic community. The Council had decided that Earth's presence in the galaxy was too risky. They had no place in the peaceful union the Council had created. The humans were out. The shockwaves spread across Earth's leaders. There was confusion at first. How could the Council do this? They had always been diplomatic, always negotiated, and always avoided conflict. But now this. The news was devastating. But the human race had a history of surviving against all odds. They would not let themselves be cast aside so easily. The betrayal was not just a political maneuver, it was personal. Humanity had been stripped of their dignity, their rights, and their place in the galaxy. But humanity wasn't known for giving up. They were known for fighting, for surviving, and for pushing through every obstacle. As Earth's leaders scrambled to make sense of the situation, a quiet plan began to form. There were a few who still believed that humanity could prove its worth. A handful of military commanders, scientists, and strategists began to work in secret. They knew the odds were against them. The Council had powerful fleets, advanced technology, and resources that Earth could only dream of. But there was one thing the Council didn't understand: the strength of humanity's spirit. The human race was resilient, and this betrayal would only make them stronger. The first steps were taken in secret. Humanity's most brilliant minds began developing new technologies, hidden from the prying eyes of the Council. They began gathering resources, preparing a fleet that would one day challenge the Council itself. But the process was slow. The Council's spies were everywhere. They had to move carefully. But each day, the fleet grew stronger, and the humans' resolve hardened. The decision was made. They would not go down without a fight. At the same time, the Council was oblivious to the brewing storm. They continued to operate under the belief that humanity would accept their fate, bowing to the will of the most powerful entities in the galaxy. But they were wrong. The message was sent. Humanity would not go quietly into the dark. The fleet, now ready, was a symbol of defiance, a statement to the galaxy that humanity would not be underestimated. As the final preparations for the fleet's launch took place, a sense of dread began to creep through the Galactic Council. There were rumors, whispers in the shadows that something was happening on Earth. But the Council dismissed these rumors. They believed the humans were weak, too fractured to put up any meaningful resistance. They had no idea what humanity was capable of when pushed too far. The moment came when the fleet was ready. Hundreds of ships, each one equipped with the latest technologies, each one a testament to humanity's ingenuity, took to the stars. They moved in secret, avoiding detection as they made their way toward the heart of the galaxy. No one knew what would happen next, but the Council would soon learn a harsh truth. They had made a grave mistake. Back on Earth, there was a strange mixture of fear and excitement. People knew the stakes were high. There were those who believed this was the end, that humanity was doomed to be wiped out by the superior forces of the Galactic Council. But there were others who believed this was their chance to show the galaxy what humanity was made of. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about survival. It was about proving that humanity belonged among the stars. The fleet was not just a military force. It was a statement to every race in the galaxy. Earth would not be forgotten. Earth would not be cast aside. The day came when the fleet, hidden in the vastness of space, arrived at the outer reaches of the Galactic Council's domain. No one knew they were coming. The Council was focused on other matters, thinking that humanity had already been dealt with. But they couldn't have been more wrong. The first ship in the human fleet broke through the outer defenses of the Council's space. The attack was sudden, shocking, and brutal. The human fleet didn't waste time. They didn't hesitate. They struck hard, with a power and precision that sent waves of panic throughout the Council. For the first time in centuries, the Galactic Council found themselves on the back foot, scrambling to respond to a threat they had never expected. The news spread quickly, and the galaxy was thrown into chaos. The Council had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated humanity. And now the consequences would be dire. The human fleet was not just about military might. It was about defiance, about a species that had been pushed too far, and now would stop at nothing to reclaim their place in the galaxy. The Galactic Council thought they could betray humanity and face no consequences. But they had no idea that when humanity fought back, they fought with everything they had. The human fleet was on the move, and the Galactic Council had just begun to realize the price they would pay for their betrayal. Humanity's fleet moved silently through the vastness of space, its ships like shadows in the dark. The Galactic Council, still reeling from the shock of the initial attack, had no idea how to respond. Earth's retaliation had been swift and brutal, catching them off guard. The Council's once impenetrable defenses were faltering under the weight of the human assault. This was not the first time the Council had faced war, but it was the first time they had encountered an enemy like humanity, an enemy with an unbreakable spirit, relentless and unforgiving. On Earth, the feeling of uncertainty that had plagued humanity in the wake of the betrayal was now replaced by a growing sense of hope. For the first time in years, the human race was united with one purpose: survival. The fleet, a testament to the ingenuity and strength of the species, was advancing deeper into Council space. Each ship was a symbol of defiance, crafted from human hands with technology born from desperation and determination. Every move, every strike was calculated. Every battle fought with a fierce will to prove that humanity had a place in the stars. The Council's panic only deepened as humanity's fleet made its way to the heart of their territory. The Council had never faced an enemy that could match their power, and now they were facing a force that wasn't just fighting for survival, it was fighting for vengeance. They had thought they could control the galaxy with their alliances, their superior weapons, and their vast resources. But humanity was different. Humanity fought not for conquest, but for the right to exist. The first human strike had been devastating, but now, humanity's fleet was moving with purpose. Each battle, each skirmish, had been a warning to the Galactic Council. They could no longer ignore the power of Earth. The Council's leaders, once so confident in their control, were now questioning everything. They had never imagined that a species like humanity would stand up to them, much less challenge their rule. They had underestimated the depth of human resolve. The human fleet continued to advance, taking control of smaller, less defended Council outposts. With each victory, the fleet grew bolder, more confident. The Council, now fully aware of the threat, scrambled to mobilize their forces. They had underestimated humanity's ability to organize and fight as one. Now, they would have to pay the price. On Earth, the news of each victory spread like wildfire. The world's leaders watched as their fleet dismantled the Council's forces, one star system at a time. But even as humanity's soldiers cheered their successes, a dark reality hung over them. The Council was not a force to be taken lightly. They would retaliate, and the next battle could decide the fate of the entire galaxy. The tension among humanity's leaders was palpable. They had learned a valuable lesson in the early stages of the conflict. They could win, but victory would come at a price. The Galactic Council would not back down easily, and their forces were vast. But the humans had something the Council could never understand: the will to fight for what they believed in. The Council's leadership convened in a secret meeting, their fear palpable. They had underestimated humanity's capabilities, but they still held an ace up their sleeve. The Council had powerful weapons, ancient technologies that had been hidden away for centuries, waiting for the moment when they would be needed. Now was that moment. But even as they prepared to unleash their most devastating weapon, there was a lingering doubt. Could it stop humanity's fleet, or would it only make the situation worse? Meanwhile, back on Earth, military commanders and strategists were formulating a new plan. They knew the Council would retaliate soon, and they had to be ready. Humanity's fleet was advancing, but the Council's response could wipe it out in an instant. Time was running out, and Earth's leaders were racing against it. They had no choice but to push forward, to fight, and to take what was rightfully theirs. The human fleet, now growing stronger with each passing day, moved toward the heart of the Council's territory. The fleet was now fully operational, its crews battle-hardened, its weapons and ships in perfect synchronization. Humanity had never been more united, more determined to fight for their place in the galaxy. They were no longer the underdogs. They were a force to be reckoned with, and the Galactic Council would soon learn that underestimating humanity had been the biggest mistake of their existence. As the fleet moved deeper into enemy territory, the stakes grew higher. The Council, in their desperation, had no choice but to escalate the conflict. They deployed their elite forces, their most advanced warships, and their deadliest weapons, hoping to crush humanity's resolve once and for all. But the human fleet was ready. They had faced adversity before, and each time, they had come out stronger. This time would be no different. The final confrontation was looming, and the fate of the galaxy rested in the hands of humanity. Would they continue to push forward, despite the overwhelming odds? Or would the Council's retaliation be enough to crush their dreams of survival? The tension was unbearable, and neither side knew what the next move would bring. The only thing certain was that the Galactic Council had made a grave mistake, and humanity was ready to make them pay. The atmosphere in the command centers on Earth was electric with anticipation. The fleet was moving deeper into Council space, but each new system they entered brought them closer to the heart of the enemy's territory. It wasn't just the strategic value of each system that mattered anymore. It was the message they were sending. Humanity was no longer afraid. They were not just fighting to survive. They were fighting to reclaim what was taken from them. Every star they passed, every planet they conquered, was a victory for humanity and a humiliation for the Galactic Council. Back on Earth, the government leaders watched every battle unfold. The media broadcasted the success of their military forces in real time, showing civilians across the globe the immense power that humanity was capable of. But even as celebrations erupted on Earth, there was an undeniable tension in the air. Everyone knew that the Council wouldn't just sit back and let humanity continue its march forward. The Galactic Council was powerful, ruthless, and had resources far beyond what Earth could dream of. Humanity had struck the first blow, but the Council would retaliate, and that retaliation would likely be catastrophic. The Galactic Council's response came quickly. They knew that their usual methods of diplomacy and sanctions wouldn't work on the humans. They had already shown too much resolve. It was time to pull out the big guns. They unleashed a new weapon, one that had been designed for situations like this. The weapon was called the Eclipse, a massive warship capable of destroying entire fleets with a single shot. The Council believed that no one could withstand the might of the eclipse, and they were determined to use it to crush humanity's rebellion before it could grow further. The first sighting of the eclipse was nothing short of terrifying. As it appeared on the edge of a distant star system, its sheer size and destructive power made the human fleet look small in comparison. The ship was unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Its dark, ominous shape glinted with deadly purpose as it slowly made its way toward the human fleet. It was clear that the Council wasn't going to take the rebellion lightly anymore. The human commanders were immediately put on high alert. This was no longer just a battle for survival, it was a fight for their very existence. The eclipse had enough firepower to obliterate their entire fleet, and they had no idea how to stop it. The fleet's first reaction was to fall back, to regroup and plan a strategy to fight this monstrous threat. But they quickly realized that running wasn't an option. Humanity couldn't afford to retreat any longer. The Council had pushed them this far, and now they had no choice but to stand their ground. As the human fleet gathered for what could be their final stand, the tension was unbearable. They knew that the eclipse was on its way, and there was no guarantee that they would survive. But there was something else in the air, something that couldn't be denied. Humanity had faced worse before. They had survived against impossible odds, had fought against enemies far more powerful than themselves, and now they had to do it again. In the heart of the fleet, Commander Olivia Grant stood at the helm of the lead ship, watching as the shadow of the eclipse grew larger and larger on the radar. She had led her crew through countless battles, and now she faced the greatest challenge of all. Her eyes scanned the faces of her crew, her soldiers, her friends. There was fear in their eyes, yes, but there was also something else. Determination. They would not give up. They would not back down. For the first time in history, humanity was standing toe-to-toe with the most powerful military force in the galaxy. And they were ready. The eclipse grew closer. Its weapons were already charging, its deadly energy pulses lighting up the darkness of space. The human fleet had no time to lose. The commanders issued orders to prepare for the worst. Every ship in the fleet would need to fight like never before. The hope was slim, but the humans had something the Council didn't: heart. They fought for their homes, for their families, for everything they had ever known. The Council, on the other hand, fought only to maintain control. As the eclipse closed in, the human fleet formed up in a defensive line, all ships ready to sacrifice everything. It was a desperate move, but it was the only move they had. And just as the Council's flagship fired its first devastating shot, a sudden explosion rocked the fleet. The human ships retaliated with everything they had, unleashing a barrage of missiles and plasma fire. It wasn't enough to stop the eclipse, but it did something that no one expected. It slowed it down. The massive warship, though powerful, had been caught off guard by the sheer tenacity of the human fleet. In that moment, humanity saw the opportunity they needed. They weren't just fighting to defend their fleet. They were fighting for the future. The commanders on Earth and in space issued new orders. Launch everything. Every weapon, every ship, every piece of tech humanity had been developing was now in play. This was their chance to prove that they were not the helpless, weak species the Council thought they were. The battle raged on for hours, each side taking heavy losses. The eclipse's power was overwhelming, but humanity's resolve was stronger. Every time it seemed like the fleet would be destroyed, humanity fought back with everything they had. The human fleet had turned the tide, and with each passing moment, the balance of power was shifting. But the battle was far from over. The Council had more ships, more firepower, and they weren't going to stop until humanity was wiped out. But in the midst of the chaos, a new weapon humanity had developed, a weapon that had been kept hidden until the moment was right, finally revealed itself. The Lightbringer was a ship unlike any other, built specifically to counter the eclipse. It was smaller, faster, and more agile, equipped with a new energy shield that could withstand even the mightiest of blows. The Lightbringer charged into the fray, its energy pulses cutting through the enemy like a blade through paper. With its arrival, the balance of the battle shifted. The Council's forces were thrown into disarray. And for the first time, humanity could see the light at the end of the tunnel. The battle raged on, and the light of the human fleet shone brighter than ever. The arrival of the Lightbringer had turned the tide, its rapid-fire energy weapons and unparalleled agility cutting through the Council's lines with surgical precision. The Eclipse, once the harbinger of destruction, now found itself on the defensive. Its powerful weapons had caused chaos, but they were no match for the speed and strategy of humanity's new weapon. Commander Olivia Grant watched in disbelief as the Lightbringer tore through the enemy ships. It was everything humanity had hoped for: fast, powerful, and adaptable. The Eclipse, despite its imposing size, was struggling to keep up. But the human fleet wasn't finished yet. There were still countless ships under the Council's command, and despite their losses, they were far from defeated. The stakes had never been higher, and humanity's resolve was the only thing keeping them from falling. On Earth, every major city was glued to their screens. The entire world was watching as the human fleet fought the greatest battle in history. The news channels broadcasted live footage of the war in space, showing the terrifying power of the Eclipse and the relentless determination of humanity. People held their breath with every explosion, every close call. They knew that their fate was being decided in the stars. And though the odds seemed insurmountable, there was a belief that had spread across Earth. Humanity could win. They had to win. But just as it seemed the human fleet was gaining the upper hand, the Council unleashed their secret weapon, the Omega Cluster, a massive fleet of ships built for one purpose: to end the rebellion once and for all. The Omega Cluster was a fleet like no other. It was made up of hundreds of ships, each one more powerful than the last. The sheer scale of the attack was enough to make even the most battle-hardened commanders on both sides feel fear. The Omega Cluster was humanity's worst nightmare brought to life. The human fleet, already battered from hours of fighting, now had to face the might of this new threat. The first wave of ships from the Omega Cluster unleashed a barrage of missiles and laser fire, turning the darkness of space into a deadly light show. The human ships were outnumbered, and though they had fought with everything they had, the force of the Omega Cluster was overwhelming. It seemed as though the tide was about to turn once again, this time in the Council's favor. Commander Grant knew that this might be their last chance. She looked at her crew, the people who had fought alongside her since the beginning. They had already sacrificed so much, but now it was time for something even greater. A final push, a chance to land a blow so devastating that it would end the conflict once and for all. The Lightbringer, the spearhead of humanity's fleet, was ready for its next phase. The plan was risky, but it was humanity's only hope. They had to disable the Omega Cluster's flagship, the Aegis, which controlled the entire fleet. Without it, the rest of the Omega Cluster would fall into disarray. As the human fleet charged toward the Aegis, a wave of fear swept over them. The Council's forces were relentless, every ship in the Omega Cluster firing relentlessly at the advancing human ships. But the human fleet pressed on. They had one advantage: their unpredictability. They had no pattern, no set strategy. Every attack was a surprise, and every move was made to confuse and outmaneuver their enemies. And it worked. The Omega Cluster's defensive lines began to fracture as human ships dove in and out of the chaos, dodging fire and returning deadly shots. Commander Grant's voice was steady as she gave the final order. All ships, focus on the Aegis. We hit it now, or we hit nothing. The fleet, now fully aware of their mission, surged forward. The Lightbringer led the charge, cutting through the enemy ships with precision. But the Aegis was heavily guarded, its defenses almost impenetrable. The human fleet was taking heavy losses as they pressed closer, and every moment felt like an eternity. The Aegis unleashed a wave of energy blasts, shattering the hulls of the human ships that dared to get too close. Yet the Lightbringer pushed forward, weaving through the onslaught, and dodging the massive blasts with its incredible speed. Commander Grant's eyes were locked on the Aegis as the Lightbringer made its final approach. This was the moment of truth. She knew that this single strike would either bring them victory or cost them everything. The Lightbringer's engines roared as it powered toward the Aegis, locking onto its target. With every passing second, the gap between them grew smaller. And then, just as it seemed that all hope was lost, the Lightbringer unleashed its full arsenal, launching everything it had left at the Aegis. The explosion was massive, blinding in its intensity. For a moment, it seemed like the universe had paused, holding its breath. The Aegis, the symbol of the Council's might, had been struck. The blast sent shockwaves through the Omega cluster, disabling several key ships in the fleet. The human fleet, battered and bruised, watched as the Aegis began to break apart. Humanity had done it. But even in their moment of triumph, the fight was far from over. The Omega cluster's remaining ships fought desperately to maintain their position, but their coordination was slipping. Without the Aegis to lead them, the fleet was crumbling from within. Commander Grant knew that the war wasn't won yet, but this victory had broken the back of the Council's power. The human fleet, though scared and bloodied, had proven that they could strike back harder than anyone had ever imagined. The galaxy was about to witness the final reckoning. Humanity had fought not just for survival, but for something far greater. They had fought for their future, and they were prepared to ensure that the Galactic Council would never make the same mistake again. 5. ChatGPT said, the human fleet was battered, their ships scared from hours of brutal combat. Yet, as the dust settled and the echoes of war rang through the emptiness of space, there was one undeniable truth. Humanity had broken the will of the Galactic Council. The Aegis, their strongest weapon, and the heart of the Omega cluster had been destroyed. The Council's mighty fleet, without its guiding hand, was in disarray. But even as victory seemed within their grasp, Commander Olivia Grant knew the hardest part was yet to come. The shattered remnants of the Omega cluster were no longer a unified force. Their ships moved erratically, with no clear command structure. Some fled, others retaliated out of desperation, but the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. Humanity had dealt the Council a blow they would never recover from. The question now was whether the humans could finish what they started before the Council's remaining forces could regroup and launch a counterattack. As the battle raged on, Commander Grant looked out at the wreckage of the once powerful Aegis. Her heart was heavy with both relief and the weight of the responsibility on her shoulders. She had led humanity to this point, but the war wasn't over. It was far from over. The Council's arrogance had nearly destroyed Earth, but now they had learned a painful lesson. Never underestimate humanity. Now, humanity had a chance not only to survive, but to thrive in the stars. The cost had been high. Countless lives lost, fleets shattered, and entire worlds turned to ash. But the stakes had always been that high. The Council, once a force that ruled the galaxy with an iron fist, was now fractured. They had underestimated the strength of a species they once considered beneath them, and now their own arrogance had become their downfall. The galaxy watched in shock as humanity, the so-called inferior race, dismantled the might of the most powerful alliance in the universe. On Earth, celebrations were already beginning. News broadcasts streamed live footage of the human fleet's victories. People were crying, laughing, and hugging in the streets. The impossible had been achieved. Humanity had proven their worth. But for Commander Grant and the rest of the fleet, there was no time for celebration. The battle had been won, but the war for the galaxy was far from over. The Galactic Council, humiliated by the defeat, was in chaos. Back on their homeworld, leaders of the Council scrambled to maintain order, their grip on power slipping. A new faction had risen, one that had seen the failure of their leaders and now sought to negotiate with humanity. It was clear that the Council would have to change. Either they would recognize humanity as an equal or risk further conflict. The old order was dying, and a new one was beginning to emerge, led by a force that had been underestimated by everyone, including themselves. Humanity wasn't content with simple survival anymore. They wanted justice. They wanted to ensure that what had happened to them would never happen again. As the human fleet moved closer to the heart of the galaxy, they prepared for the final confrontation. The Council had one last chance. Surrender and accept the new order, or face the full might of humanity's wrath. Commander Grant stood at the helm, watching the stars ahead of her. She knew that this final battle wouldn't just decide the fate of Earth, it would determine the future of the entire galaxy. The Council had made their choice when they betrayed humanity. Now, humanity would make theirs. With a steady hand, she gave the order for the final phase of the operation to begin. "Prepare the fleet," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "We're going to finish this." The human fleet, battered but unbroken, surged forward once more. Each ship moved in formation, ready for whatever came next. They had faced the Council's might and survived. They had defeated the Eclipse. They had taken down the Omega Cluster. Now, it was time for the Galactic Council to face the consequences of their actions. In the silence of space, the human fleet advanced, and with them, the future of the galaxy. Humanity had fought for their place in the stars, and now they would take it, by force if necessary. And as the final battle drew near, Commander Olivia Grant looked out at the vast expanse of space and whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." The human fleet, victorious but battle-worn, sailed through the shattered remnants of the Omega Cluster. Each ship in the fleet bore the scars of war, dented hulls, torn sails, and broken weaponry. Yet, despite the destruction, they pressed forward, their mission still far from complete. The battle with the Galactic Council had reached its tipping point, and humanity was ready to take the next step toward securing its place in the galaxy. Commander Olivia Grant stood at the bridge of the flagship, her eyes scanning the battlefield. The human fleet had turned the tide of war, but the fight was not over. The Council's forces were scattered, their ships broken and in disarray, yet they still posed a threat. The remnants of the Council's command structure would not give up easily. Olivia knew that it was only a matter of time before they would regroup and launch one final attempt to crush humanity once and for all. But the humans were not afraid. They had learned that the only way to survive in this galaxy was to fight back, hard, and they had proved that they could do so. The Council's once invincible fleet was now nothing more than a collection of shattered dreams. The Lightbringer, humanity's symbol of hope, still flew high and proud, its hull gleaming with the pride of victory. It had become a beacon to the galaxy, a shining example of what humanity was capable of. Across the galaxy, the news of humanity's victory was spreading like wildfire. No longer was Earth considered the underdog, the inferior species that had no place among the stars. Now, humanity was feared, respected, and admired. Their fleet had not only survived against impossible odds, but had crushed the most powerful alliance in the galaxy. The Galactic Council had underestimated them, and now they would pay the price. Back on Earth, people were celebrating like never before. The streets were filled with cheering crowds, banners waving proudly in the wind. Humanity had done the unthinkable. They had won. The victory over the Galactic Council had united every nation, every culture, every person on the planet. It was a moment of history, one that would be remembered for centuries to come. Humanity had proven their worth. They had earned their place among the stars. But even as the celebrations continued, Commander Grant remained focused on the future. She knew that the battle for the galaxy was far from over. The Council's defeat was only the first step. The galaxy was vast, and there were still forces out there that would seek to challenge humanity's rise to power. But for now, humanity had made a statement that no one could ignore. They were no longer just survivors. They were conquerors. The next steps were critical. The Council had been broken, but its remnants still lingered in the form of rogue fleets and scattered leaders. Some factions might seek to negotiate, while others might try to rise again. Olivia knew that the coming weeks would be crucial in shaping humanity's future. They could either consolidate their power and form new alliances or risk being dragged into another conflict. The galaxy was watching, waiting to see what humanity would do next. The question now was whether humanity would continue to fight for dominance, or whether they would seek peace. Commander Grant knew that peace was a luxury they couldn't afford. The galaxy had already seen what humanity was capable of when pushed to the brink. The Council had learned that lesson in blood, and the rest of the galaxy would have to learn it too. As the human fleet moved forward, its destination clear, Olivia Grant's thoughts were focused on the future. She had led humanity to victory, but the road ahead would not be easy. The galaxy was vast, and there were still many who would challenge humanity's place in it. But with the Lightbringer leading the way, humanity had already proven that they could overcome any challenge. The fleet reached the edge of Council space, where the final remnants of the once mighty Galactic Council were scattered like the broken pieces of a shattered empire. Their leaders, once untouchable, now cowered in fear as the human fleet approached. It was clear that the Council had no chance of recovery. Their grip on the galaxy had been shattered, and humanity had emerged victorious. Yet Commander Grant knew this was not the end. The galaxy was changing. Old powers were crumbling, and new ones were rising. Humanity had taken its first step into this new galaxy, and there was no turning back. The Council had fallen, but the future was uncertain. Would humanity become the new rulers of the stars, or would they fall victim to the same fate as the Council? Only time would tell. As the fleet prepared for the final phase of their mission, Olivia Grant stood at the helm, looking out into the stars. Her voice was steady, filled with resolve as she gave the order. Prepare for the next stage. The galaxy belongs to us now. We will not let it slip away. With those words, humanity took its first steps into the unknown future, and the galaxy would never be the same again. Humanity's victory over the Galactic Council had left the galaxy in a state of shock. What was once an impossible dream had become a brutal reality. Humanity had dismantled the most powerful force the galaxy had ever known. Now the question on everyone's mind was what would come next. For Commander Olivia Grant and the human fleet, the task ahead was no longer about survival. It was about securing a future for humanity and ensuring that the lessons learned from this war would never be forgotten. The remnants of the Galactic Council had scattered to the farthest corners of the galaxy, but they had not been completely destroyed. Many of the leaders had fled, seeking refuge in the outer systems, where their influence was weaker but still potent. Others had surrendered, knowing that further resistance was futile. The question now was how humanity would respond to these broken pieces of the old order. Would they seek to rebuild, create new alliances, and bring stability to the galaxy? Or would they strike with the same brutal force that had dismantled the Council's power? In the quiet of her flagship, Commander Grant stared out into the abyss of space, her thoughts heavy with the weight of the decisions ahead. The human fleet had won, yes, but what would they do with their newfound power? She knew that the galaxy was vast, and there were still many who would challenge humanity's rise. Some of the older powers, those that had never before considered humanity a real threat, were already making their move. They were watching, waiting, and preparing for the possibility of another war. But there was something else at play, something more subtle but just as dangerous: the internal struggles of humanity. Not every leader, not every faction, agreed on the future path. Some believed in diplomacy, in forging alliances with the surviving factions of the Council. Others, like Olivia, saw that peace might only be temporary. The galaxy had shown time and again that power was the only language anyone truly understood. As humanity's fleets continued to patrol the former Council space, ensuring that no remnants of the old regime could rise again, tensions began to simmer among the factions. The planets that had once been under the rule of the Council were now in chaos. Some sought autonomy, while others looked to humanity for leadership. The balance of power had shifted, but the galaxy had not yet found its new equilibrium. Back on Earth, the people celebrated their hard-won victory, but Olivia knew that the true battle was still ahead. The question was no longer whether humanity could survive. They had proven that. The real question was whether they could navigate the complex web of galactic politics, forging a future where they were not just survivors, but rulers of the stars. In the following weeks, Commander Grant and her senior officers held meetings with leaders from the newly formed galactic alliances. It became clear that humanity had a pivotal role to play in the future of the galaxy. Some factions sought to join forces with humanity, while others viewed them as a threat to their own power. Olivia knew that the key to securing humanity's place in this new order would be a combination of strength and diplomacy. One thing was certain: humanity would not be a passive player. They had earned their place in the galaxy, and they would fight to maintain it. The war with the Galactic Council had ended, but the true challenge was just beginning. The human fleet prepared for its next mission, one that would take them beyond the edges of the galaxy, into the unknown reaches where new threats and opportunities awaited. As Commander Grant stood on the bridge of the flagship, watching the stars streak past, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the future pressing down on her. The galaxy had changed. Humanity had changed. But there was still much work to be done. The fight for control of the galaxy was far from over. And as long as humanity drew breath, they would continue to push forward, to challenge, and to rise. "We've come this far," Olivia said, her voice steady and resolute. "Now we finish what we started. We don't just survive. We conquer." The fleet surged forward, each ship a symbol of humanity's strength and determination. The stars were now theirs to navigate, and no one would stand in their way. Humanity had been betrayed by the Council, but in the end, it was humanity that had the last word. They had taken the stars from the Council, and they would keep them forever. With those final words, Commander Olivia Grant watched the stars ahead of her, knowing that the journey was only beginning. There was no turning back. The galaxy belonged to humanity now, and they would never let anyone forget it.